see that video? I mean, it's bananas.
I'll tell you why this is particularly close to my heart, because to coin a favourite phrase of the left wing, it has been my lived experience over the past 3 years or so that a lot of crimes happening against women especially seem to be committed by people who aren't from this country. I've been followed home with a man in one of those Afghan kolpol hats chuntering away in some language all the way to my front door. I had to hide in my neighbour's house and pretend I didn't live in my house because he was lurking around outside trying to do indecent things to himself. That's right. I've also had my phone robbed off me by a Roma woman with a scarf on. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Who are these people? Why are we importing all this stuff? I cannot walk down the streets where I live anymore without weird men leering at me, making comments. Look, I'm not one of these Me Too movement women. When it was builders wolf whistling from vans, I don't care. Sometimes it brightens up your day. Because what they don't do is they don't get into your personal space. They don't trail you. They don't physically approach you. They don't follow you to your front door. It's a very different sort of more harmless thing, a wolf whistle, than some of the stuff I'm being subjected to now. And some of the stuff my best mate who lives around the corner, again, her lived experience. Also, guess what? A woman with long blonde hair. She has 4 teenage daughters. All of them now have at some point been sexually assaulted. They've been groped. They have been followed. They are scared living in London. What is going on? So I am going to keep talking about this. I don't care if people turn around and goes, you're a racist, because my safety and the safety of women in this country is paramount. That is way more important than offending certain communities who, quite frankly, have men with medieval values when it comes to women, and I ain't standing for it.
Is there any way back for Sir Keir Starmer, or is he a dead PM walking?
I think the only thing that Keir Starmer can look forward to, really, Martin, is that look behind himself. Actually, is his own backbenchers and possibly his frontbenchers. I can't see anybody replacing him. To be honest, at one time there was muted about Angela Rayner replacing him. She's sort of gone missing. West Streeting is sort of slithering about in the background. He could be ready to launch the old dagger in the back, but I'm surprised. He said he had a popularity rating of 11%. I'm surprised it's as high as that at the moment, Martin, because everywhere you go in this country, as a politician, people talk to me wherever I go, and this man is despised. I think he's the most despised Prime Minister in history. I think he's cowardly. He U-turns on everything. He bends to his backbenchers all the time just to save his own skin. He's a dead man walking. I think his time is probably up after the May elections this year, but I dread to think who's going to replace him.
The British government is in absolute chaos right now. Keir Starmer, the man who promised to restore integrity to number 10, is facing calls to resign after bombshell revelations just emerged on live television. What was exposed is so damaging that even members of his own party are questioning whether he can survive this crisis. The political establishment is scrambling, the media is in a frenzy, and the British public is demanding answers. This could be the biggest political scandal to rock Westminster in years, and it's unfolding right before our eyes. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will show you exactly why Starmer's position as Prime Minister might be hanging by a thread. The scandal broke just 1 minute ago during a live television interview that nobody saw coming. Keir Starmer was supposed to be discussing routine government policy, but instead he was blindsided by revelations that have sent shockwaves through the entire political system. The interviewer presented evidence that directly contradicts statements Starmer made to Parliament, to the media and to the British people. We're talking about potential violations of ministerial code, questions about financial dealings, and accusations that could fundamentally undermine public trust in his leadership. The Prime Minister's face said it all. The confident demeanour he usually displays completely vanished as he struggled to provide coherent answers to questions that should have been straightforward if he had nothing to hide. The details are absolutely explosive. According to the revelations, Starmer allegedly had knowledge of certain controversial decisions weeks before he claimed to have been informed. This isn't just a minor discrepancy in dates or a simple miscommunication. This is about whether the Prime Minister deliberately misled the public about his involvement in decisions that affected millions of British citizens. The evidence presented on live television included internal government documents, time-stamped emails and testimony from former advisors who were willing to go on record. These aren't anonymous sources or unverified claims. These are concrete pieces of evidence that paint a very troubling picture of what's been happening behind closed doors at Downing Street. What makes this even more damaging is the timing. Starmer came into power promising transparency, accountability, and a clean break from the scandals that plagued previous administrations. He positioned himself as the antidote to the chaos, the steady hand that would restore faith in British politics. But now, those very promises are being thrown back in his face. The opposition is already calling this the ultimate hypocrisy. They're arguing that Starmer held previous prime ministers to impossibly high standards, demanded resignations over far less serious matters, and now finds himself caught in a scandal that by his own standards should disqualify him from office. The political irony is not lost on anyone watching this unfold. The immediate reaction has been swift and brutal. Social media exploded within minutes of the revelations airing. The hashtag calling for Starmer's resignation started trending almost immediately, with thousands of people expressing their shock, anger and disappointment. Political commentators who usually defend the Prime Minister were left speechless, unable to provide the kind of robust defence they normally offer. Even some Labour MPS, members of Starmer's own party, were caught off guard and struggled to respond to reporters asking for their reaction. The silence from many government ministers is deafening, and in politics, silence often speaks louder than words. When your own team isn't rushing to defend you, that's when you know you're in serious trouble. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This isn't just about one scandal or one set of revelations. This appears to be the tip of the iceberg. Journalists are now digging deeper, investigating other aspects of Starmer's time in office, looking for patterns of behaviour that might have been overlooked or ignored. Former government insiders are reportedly preparing to come forward with additional information that could make today's revelations look tame by comparison. The floodgates might be opening, and once that happens in politics, it's almost impossible to close them again. Starmer isn't just dealing with one crisis, he's potentially facing a cascade of scandals that could completely destroy his credibility and his ability to govern effectively. The constitutional implications of this scandal are massive. In British politics, the ministerial code is supposed to be sacred. It's the set of rules that governs how ministers and the Prime Minister should conduct themselves. Violations of this code have historically led to resignations, even when the violations seemed relatively minor compared to what we're seeing now. Starmer himself has previously argued that anyone who misleads Parliament should resign immediately, no questions asked, no second chances. He made this argument repeatedly when he was in opposition, using it as a weapon against his political opponents. Now that same weapon is being turned against him, and he has nowhere to hide. The legal experts are already weighing in, and their analysis is damning. Several constitutional scholars have stated that if the allegations are proven true, Starmer would have no choice but to resign to maintain the integrity of the office. They point out that the Prime Minister cannot effectively lead if there are serious questions about his honesty and transparency. The opposition parties are already preparing no confidence motions, parliamentary inquiries and demands for independent investigations. The Conservative Party, still reeling from their own recent troubles, sees this as an opportunity to rebuild their credibility by positioning themselves as the defenders of parliamentary standards. The irony is palpable, but in politics, short-term memory is incredibly convenient when it serves your purposes. What's particularly devastating for Starmer is that this scandal strikes at the heart of his personal brand. Unlike some politicians who embrace their controversial nature or wear their scandals as badges of honour, Starmer built his entire political identity around being the responsible adult in the room. He's the former prosecutor, the man of law and order, the person who follows the rules and expects everyone else to do the same. His whole appeal was based on competence, integrity and trustworthiness. When that foundation cracks, when people start questioning whether he's been honest with them, the entire structure collapses. He doesn't have the charisma to fall back on. He doesn't have the populist appeal to weather the storm. His credibility was his only real asset, and now it's being systematically destroyed. The media feeding frenzy is unlike anything we've seen in recent British politics. Every major news outlet is running this as their lead story. Television programmes are being interrupted for breaking news updates. Newspapers are preparing special editions. Political talk shows are going into overdrive, bringing in every expert, every commentator, every former politician they can find to dissect what this means for British democracy. The 24-hour news cycle has found its perfect story, a scandal with genuine substance, real consequences, and the potential to bring down a sitting Prime Minister. For journalists who've been waiting for a truly significant political story, this is their moment, and they're not going to let it go easily. Inside Downing Street, panic is reportedly setting in. Sources close to the Prime Minister describe a bunker mentality, with senior advisors trying desperately to formulate a response strategy that can contain the damage. But here's the problem they're facing. The traditional crisis management playbook doesn't work. When the evidence is this strong and this public, you can't dismiss it as fake news when it was broadcast on live television. You can't claim it's been taken out of context when the context makes it worse, not better. You can't blame it on junior staff when the Prime Minister himself is directly implicated. Every standard political defence mechanism is useless in this situation, leaving Starmer with very few options, none of them good. The political calculations happening right now across Westminster are absolutely ruthless. Labour MPs are privately asking themselves a brutal question. Is Keir Starmer now an electoral liability? Can the party win the next election with him as leader, or does he need to be sacrificed to save the broader political project? These conversations are happening in hushed tones, in parliamentary offices, in private WhatsApp groups, and over discreet phone calls. Nobody wants to be the first to publicly call for his resignation because that carries its own risk, but nobody wants to be the last one defending him either if this situation continues to deteriorate. Political survival instincts are kicking in. And when that happens, loyalty becomes a luxury that few can afford. The opposition parties are circling like sharks who've smelled blood in the water. The Conservatives are preparing a full-scale assault, planning to use every parliamentary mechanism available to keep this scandal in the headlines for as long as possible. They're talking about emergency debates, urgent questions, demands for the Prime Minister to appear before select committees to explain himself under oath. The Liberal Democrats and other smaller parties are also piling on, recognising that this is their opportunity to be relevant in a news cycle that usually ignores them. Everyone wants a piece of this story. Everyone wants to be seen as holding the powerful to account, and Starmer is the target they've all been waiting for. Public opinion is shifting rapidly, and the polling data is going to be brutal when it comes out. Early social media sentiment analysis suggests a massive swing in how people view Starmer's trustworthiness. The numbers are moving in the wrong direction at an alarming speed. Focus groups conducted immediately after the revelations show voters using words like betrayed, disappointed and angry. These aren't just Conservative voters enjoying the schadenfreude of seeing a Labour Prime Minister in trouble. These are people who voted for Starmer, who believed his promises, who thought he represented something different. Their disillusionment is profound and politically devastating because disappointed supporters don't just switch their votes, they become actively hostile and they tell everyone they know about why they feel betrayed. The international implications cannot be ignored either. Britain's allies are watching this crisis unfold with growing concern. A politically weakened Prime Minister cannot effectively represent the country on the world stage. Important negotiations get delayed, international commitments get questioned, and Britain's credibility in global affairs takes a hit. Foreign leaders who were scheduled to meet with Starmer are reportedly reconsidering whether those meetings should go ahead or whether they should wait to see if he's still going to be Prime Minister next month. This kind of political instability doesn't just affect domestic politics. It ripples outward, affecting trade relationships, security partnerships, and Britain's overall standing in the world. The broader question that everyone is asking is whether this is a temporary crisis that Starmer can survive or whether this is the beginning of the end of his premiership. History provides some guidance here, and it's not encouraging for the Prime Minister. Political scandals that involve questions of personal integrity rarely end well for the person at the centre. You can survive policy failures, you can survive economic downturns, you can even survive unpopular decisions if people believe you're acting in good faith. But once the public decides you've lied to them, once they conclude you cannot be trusted, the path back to credibility is almost impossible to find. Trust is the currency of political leadership, and Starmer's account is being rapidly depleted. The next 48 hours are going to be absolutely critical. Starmer has to make some very difficult decisions about how to respond to this crisis. Does he go on the offensive, aggressively denying the allegations and attacking the credibility of those making them? Does he try to minimise the significance, admitting to minor errors while denying the more serious implications? Does he offer a full apology and hope that contrition will buy him some goodwill? Or does he do what some are already quietly suggesting and consider whether his position has become untenable? Each option carries enormous risks, and there's no clear path that guarantees political survival. This is the kind of moment that defines careers and legacies, and Starmer is running out of time to get this right. The pressure from within his own party is going to intensify dramatically. Senior Labour figures who have invested their careers in this government are going to demand answers, and they're going to demand them privately before they're forced to take positions publicly. Backbench MPs who face re-election are going to be particularly nervous because they don't want to be associated with a scandal-plagued Prime Minister when they're trying to defend their seats. The party machinery is going to start running scenarios about what happens if Starmer has to go, who could replace him, how a leadership transition could be managed to minimise electoral damage. These conversations might seem premature to outsiders, but in politics, you always need to be thinking 3 moves ahead. And right now, Starmer's position looks increasingly precarious. What makes this situation even more volatile is that we still don't know if there are more revelations coming. Investigative journalists are working their sources, parliamentary committees are preparing to launch inquiries, and former government insiders who might have remained silent are now reconsidering whether it's time to speak up. In modern political scandals, the initial revelation is rarely the worst part. It's the subsequent disclosures, the drip, drip, drip of damaging information that really destroys political careers. Starmer might survive today's scandal, but can he survive what comes tomorrow, or the day after, or next week? The uncertainty itself is destabilising, creating an environment where his authority is constantly being undermined and questioned. The constitutional mechanisms for removing a sitting Prime Minister are complex and politically fraught. In the British system, the Prime Minister serves at the pleasure of Parliament, not through a fixed term like some other democracies. If enough of his own MPs lose confidence in him, if a no confidence motion succeeds, or if the political pressure becomes so intense that continuing in office is impossible, then resignation becomes inevitable. We've seen this pattern before with previous Prime Ministers who found themselves in untenable positions. The question is whether Starmer recognises how serious this situation is, and whether he's willing to make the difficult choice to step aside if that's what's necessary to protect his party and the broader political stability of the country. Looking at the bigger picture, this scandal represents something more than just the potential downfall of one politician. It reflects a deeper crisis of trust in British politics that has been building for years. Scandal after scandal, broken promise after broken promise, the British public has become increasingly cynical about their political leaders. Starmer was supposed to be different. He was supposed to restore that trust and prove that principled leadership was still possible. If he falls because of his own ethical failings, it reinforces the most damaging narrative in modern politics, that they're all the same, that you can't trust any of them, that the whole system is broken beyond repair. The implications of that go far beyond one Prime Minister or one scandal. They strike at the heart of democratic legitimacy itself. So where does this leave us? Right now, Keir Starmer is fighting for his political life. The revelations that emerged just 1 minute ago have created a crisis that could end his premiership. The evidence is damaging, the political pressure is mounting, and the options for survival are limited. In the coming days, we're going to see whether Starmer can find a way to weather this storm, or whether this is the scandal that finally brings him down. The British political establishment is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. One thing is certain, though, British politics has been turned upside down and nothing is going to be the same after today. This is a defining moment, not just for Starmer, but for the entire future of British democracy. The world is watching. The British public is demanding answers, and time is running out for the Prime Minister to save his career. The aftermath of these revelations is going to reshape British politics for years to come, regardless of whether Starmer survives or not. What we're witnessing right now is not just a political scandal, but a fundamental moment of reckoning for how power is exercised and accountability is enforced in modern democracy. The precedent being set in these crucial hours will determine how future prime ministers are held to account, what standards they're expected to meet, and what consequences they face when those standards are violated. Every politician watching this unfold is taking notes, understanding that the rules of the game are being rewritten in real time, and that nobody is immune from the kind of scrutiny that Starmer is now facing. The mechanics of how this scandal could actually force Starmer from office are worth understanding because they reveal the unique pressures of the British parliamentary system. Unlike presidential systems where leaders have fixed terms and formal impeachment processes, British prime ministers hold power through a much more fragile arrangement. They need the confidence of their parliamentary party, the support of their cabinet, and the tolerance of the broader political establishment. When any of these pillars starts to crumble, the entire structure becomes unstable. Right now, all three are showing serious cracks. Cabinet ministers are notably absent from television studios where they would normally be defending their leader. Parliamentary colleagues are offering lukewarm support at best and damaging silence at worst. The political establishment, including neutral observers and constitutional experts, are openly questioning whether his position is sustainable. The human element of this crisis cannot be overlooked either. Keir Starmer is not just a political figure or an abstract concept. He's a person who has dedicated his career to public service, who genuinely believed he could make a difference, who sacrificed privacy and personal comfort to take on the most demanding job in British politics. Regardless of what you think about his policies or his leadership, watching anyone face this kind of public destruction is sobering. The personal toll of political scandals is immense. The constant media scrutiny, the attacks from all sides, the betrayal by allies who distance themselves to protect their own careers, the knowledge that your reputation is being permanently damaged in front of millions of people. This is the brutal reality of leadership when things go wrong. And it's a reminder of why so few people are willing to put themselves in these positions of ultimate accountability. Behind the scenes, the machinery of government continues to function, even as the political crisis escalates. Civil servants are still doing their jobs. Ministers are still making decisions. The business of governing doesn't stop just because the Prime Minister is fighting for survival. But there's an undeniable impact on effectiveness when political authority is compromised. Important decisions get delayed because nobody wants to make controversial choices during a crisis. Long-term planning becomes impossible because nobody knows who will be in charge next month. International partners become... The media's role in this unfolding drama deserves examination as well. Journalists are doing their job by exposing wrongdoing and holding power to account, which is essential in any healthy democracy. But there's also a feeding frenzy aspect to political scandals that can spiral beyond proportional coverage into something that resembles entertainment more than journalism. The line between necessary scrutiny and destructive sensationalism is often blurred during these moments. Every minor development gets breathlessly reported as breaking news. Speculation gets presented alongside facts. Anonymous sources make claims that can't be verified but still shape public perception. The media ecosystem has its own incentives and dynamics that don't always align with the public interest. And during major political scandals, these tensions become particularly visible and particularly problematic. What happens if Starmer actually does resign? The process of replacing a sitting Prime Minister is complex and politically charged. The Labour Party would need to decide whether to hold a full leadership contest or whether to install an interim leader quickly to provide stability. Different factions within the party would immediately start positioning their preferred candidates. The media would begin intense speculation about who might take over and what their leadership would mean for the country. The opposition parties would exploit the chaos to argue that Labour is unfit to govern and that a general election should be called immediately. The entire political system would enter a period of heightened uncertainty and instability that could last for months. And all of this would be happening while the country faces serious economic challenges, international pressures, and domestic policy issues that require consistent leadership and clear direction. The alternative scenario where Starmer manages to survive is almost as complex. Even if he clings to power, his authority would be permanently diminished. Every future decision would be questioned through the lens of this scandal. His ability to command loyalty from his party would be compromised. His moral authority to criticise opponents would be destroyed. He would likely become a lame duck prime minister, holding office but unable to exercise real power, constantly fighting rearguard actions against critics within his own party and facing relentless attacks from opposition parties who smell weakness. This kind of diminished leadership is arguably worse for the country than a clean break and a fresh start because it combines the instability of transition with the ineffectiveness of compromised authority. The public's reaction will ultimately determine how this resolves. Politicians can strategise and manoeuvre all they want, but in a democracy, public opinion eventually becomes impossible to ignore. If the British people decide that Starmer has lost their trust and needs to go, that pressure will become irresistible. Polls will show plummeting approval ratings. Phone-ins and social media will be dominated by calls for resignation. Constituency offices will be flooded with angry communications from voters. MPS will return from their constituencies reporting that they cannot defend the Prime Minister to their own supporters. This grassroots pressure, when it reaches a certain intensity, becomes the most powerful force in politics. More powerful than party loyalty, more powerful than personal ambition, more powerful than any strategic calculation. The people, when they speak with one voice, cannot be ignored indefinitely. There's also a generational dimension to this crisis that's worth considering. Younger voters who are already cynical about politics are having their worst assumptions confirmed. They see another leader who promised change delivering more of the same scandals and disappointments. This generational disillusionment has long-term consequences for democratic participation and civic engagement. When young people conclude that all politicians are corrupt or dishonest, they disengage from the political process entirely, which weakens democracy and makes it harder to address the serious challenges facing the country. Starmer's scandals is not just about one person's career, it's about whether an entire generation will give up on the possibility of honest, effective leadership. The international observers watching this British political crisis are drawing their own conclusions about democratic stability and governance. Authoritarian leaders will use this as evidence that democracy is chaotic and ineffective compared to their own systems. Democratic allies will worry about Britain's reliability as a partner when its political system seems so volatile. Investors and businesses will factor political instability into their decisions about where to allocate resources and make long-term commitments. The soft power that Britain has carefully cultivated over decades can be eroded remarkably quickly when political scandals dominate the international news coverage and create an impression of dysfunction and unreliability. Looking ahead to the immediate future, the next few days will bring crucial developments that determine Starmer's fate. Will more damaging information emerge? Will senior party figures publicly call for him to step down? Will cabinet ministers resign in protest or in an attempt to distance themselves from the scandal? Will the parliamentary party move to force a leadership change? Will Starmer himself conclude that his position is untenable and make the decision to resign before he's pushed? These questions will be answered soon, and the answers will shape British politics for years to come. The tension is unbearable, the stakes are enormous, and the outcome remains genuinely uncertain. This is political drama at its most intense, with real consequences for millions of people who depend on effective governance and trustworthy leadership. The revelations that emerged just minutes ago have set in motion events that cannot be stopped or controlled, and we are all witnessing history being made in real time. Whatever happens next, British politics will never be quite the same again, and the lessons learnt from this crisis will echo through the corridors of power for generations to come.